Hello, in this video we're going to look at how to write a proposal for the Cambridge English Advanced exam. The proposal is one of the many options that might appear in part 2 of the writing paper, so it's really important that you know what you're doing. So let's take a look at the nuts and bolts first. What do you really need to do to write a proposal? Well, as always, read the task carefully. It's really important that you know what you're doing. Underline the content points. There's a reason that you're writing the proposal. You need to look at the rubric and underline the parts that say exactly what you have to do. Then write your proposal in between 220 and 260 words. It's better to go a little bit over the word limit than to stay under, because you give yourself a better opportunity to write more English. So let's think about the target reader for this exam. Who wants to read your proposal? Well, usually it's somebody who is planning some future action and they want your help in deciding what to do. The target reader might be a college principal, or they could be your manager at work, but either way they want some information. They want specific recommendations, so the information that you give them must be clear and full of figures where appropriate. Now remember, you can make information up. It doesn't have to be based on factual accuracy or anything like that. Then finally, you also have to think about convincing the target reader of the correctness or appropriacy of your recommendations. Here's an example task then. It's fairly typical of what Cambridge might ask you for. So you go to an international language school and you feel that the facilities at the school are not perfect. You want to suggest some recommendations to the school principal of ways that they could improve the facilities at the school. So if we look then at the content points, you need to outline the improvements you think they will need to make and comment on their likely impact and the cost to the school. So these are the three things that are really crucial to do. So in terms of structure, you definitely need to use headings. Reports and proposals have that in common. And then the number of paragraphs that you want to include is really equal to the number of recommendations you want to make, along with a little introduction at the start, just to say what you want to do. You might feel that you want to include a conclusion, but it's not necessary really. The last recommendation you make might work as a conclusion anyway, but the person reading your proposal is going to be much more interested in the recommendations you make rather than the conclusion at the end of it. So let's think a little bit more then. Proposals should be written in a formal or neutral register. Formal language is much more noun heavy and it relies on longer sentences. So for example, saying the school needs to improve the computer equipment, presently it's difficult to even watch YouTube videos, is not a bad couple of sentences, but we can do much better. We could say improvements to the computer equipment currently in use are particularly desirable since problems have occurred even with the simple task of video playback. If we look at this sentence in more detail, we've only really got, two verbs maybe, two verb structures. We've got a lot more nouns than verbs, and that's what you find with formal writing. So here's an example then of maybe a model answer. It's just a skeleton, so you would have a lot more detail in the exam. So we have our introduction, which writes the rubric again in our own words. We don't want to copy and paste. We want to come up with something a little bit more original than that to show off our own language. And then the first recommendation is about new computers. This is kind of an obvious thing. Then Wi-Fi, maybe a little bit less obvious. And then an online shop, which I would say is the least obvious of these ideas. And we'll come back to this idea of obvious and less obvious ideas in a minute. So let's have a look at the different areas that are marked. By covering all of the content points in the rubric and adding some details, really there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to get 5 marks out of 5 for the content. And it really helps when you're coming up with ideas if you take something from the real world and just kind of twist it around. If you think about your own school, if you go to a school, what would you improve there? Maybe if you have recently left school or university, you can think back to that time. If there was something that wasn't good enough, suggest a way to fix that. If there was something that was good, imagine that the school didn't have it. Imagine that it was lacking that thing, and then make that your recommendation. Calling on your real world experience really does wonders in all of the different aspects of the writing paper. So let's think also about communicative achievement. Now, the proposal doesn't need to be entertaining as such, but it does need to hold the target reader's attention. And using convincing language, the language that convinces somebody to do something, will certainly do that. You need to keep the register formal or at least neutral. And don't limit yourself to simple ideas. Now, the ideas that we saw in the model answer started with something quite simple and obvious, and that was upgrading the computer systems. A more complex idea in this case would be the idea of having an online shop, and then having details and facts to back up the reasoning would make that complex idea more rounded. Even simple ideas you can make seem more complex. You can add complexity to them by introducing something that maybe the target reader wouldn't have thought of themselves. It's an obvious thing that computers need to be replaced, but if you have specific knowledge of computers, for example, let's say that you know that Windows Vista, Windows 7 I think even, won't be getting any more security updates. That's a complex idea that you could introduce to your recommendations. You could say we need new computers simply because Windows isn't going to be updated beyond Windows 7 going backwards. And any new security concerns will leave our school open to attack. That's a complex idea. It's a lot more complex than saying we need computers because the ones we've got are old. That's simple. So always try to think of adding a bit more complexity. And try to use modals as much as possible to speculate about the effectiveness of your ideas. And that way you make it seem like something you've considered a lot more fully. Otherwise you'll be falling into the trap of telling, you'd kind of come across as arrogant if you simply put things in present simple with no sign of a modal. You make everything seem like a fait accompli, something that's already kind of done, obvious. So what about organisation? Well, it's not just about using the right headings, though it definitely helps if you do. Use linking words to show how your ideas fit together. And in formal language, make sure that while your sentences are long, keep them readable. And look at other examples of formal writing here to help. Count how many nouns there are for every verb. Compare it to the way people normally speak. When we speak to each other, there's a ratio of maybe 2 to 1. And that kind of follows really, because in a typical English language sentence, we have a subject, which would be a noun, a verb, and then an object, and that would be a noun. So we've got 2 nouns, 1 verb, and then we just repeat that sort of structure. Sometimes it can go up to nearer 3 to 1 as a ratio. But if you look at the way that formal language works, we have these dense clusters of nouns, the X of Y structures. A feeling of confidence, that's already 2 nouns before we've even introduced a verb. And you find that more and more with formal writing. Your formal writing needs to match that idea. And then we come to language as well. Formal writing does give you this chance to show off your knowledge of advanced noun formation, which is really good. But do be careful with your spelling. I've seen a lot of students misspell the word recommendation, and that's actually kind of unforgivable because it's always in the rubric. It's right there on the paper in front of you. So just kind of making this transcription error, it's silly, it's not necessary. Learn some set phrases that will help you as well. For example, you could learn, according to the majority of the students in my class. You learn that phrase and you just plug it in. You make it work for you in a proposal, just as you could do in a report. Passive constructions are a more polite way to make recommendations, because saying something in an active grammar like "you should do this" is just too strong. It suggests that you know better than the target reader. You probably do. We don't want them to think that. So it's much better to say something like, "These ideas should be taken under consideration by you." We don't need to say that part because of the passive. It's great. So, that gives you then a general idea of how to approach the proposal writing task in the Cambridge Advanced exam. In this video we looked at the idea of proposing improvements to a school or other educational institution. What improvements would you like to see at your own school? How would they impact your ability to learn effectively? Share your ideas in the comments below. I'd be really interested to know what you think. And until next time, thank you very much.